Smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment if you think you could survive a day in solitary, because what you're about to see will make you question every meal you've ever eaten. It was 5:30 a.m., and the fluorescent lights of the federal Supermax flickered with a cold, sterile rhythm, illuminating the empty, gray corridors. ADX Florence, Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, was waking up. The faint clatter of steel doors echoed like distant gunfire through the concrete halls. Guards shuffled in tight formation, keys jangling like a sinister symphony. Inmate cells were aligned in long corridors, each with a slot in the steel door, an opening no wider than a fist, yet it carried the power to sustain or punish. Breakfast trays were about to roll out, and the inmates knew all too well that the contents were a form of control. The first tray was wheeled into cell block D. Behind the small steel slot, the hands of a man, known only as Number 413, trembled. He had been in the system for 15 years. The tray clattered against the door, and the slot slid open. What was on it wasn't food in the way most of the world understood it. It was a pale, gelatinous mass, grayish-brown, slathered over a thin slice of processed bread. The aroma was faintly metallic, punctuated by the tang of cheap protein substitute. His stomach clenched. This was survival, not sustenance. Across the hall, a young inmate named Marcus had learned quickly that the meals were more than just nutrition, they were a test of will. On a good day, the meatloaf loaf was soft enough to chew. On a bad day, it resembled cardboard soaked in disinfectant. The prisoners whispered about the infamous Nutriloaf, a punishment meal designed to be eaten in silence, without the possibility of barter. No flavor, no enjoyment, no dignity, only compliance. The guards, uniformed and impassive, watched the corridors like hawks. They knew that even a slight misstep could trigger violence. Inmates, many with violent pasts, waited with anticipation and dread. Every meal brought the risk of confrontation, whether over a crumb of bread, a slice of cheese, or a single orange. Food was currency, a bargaining chip, a spark for chaos. Inside the kitchen, the preparation was just as chilling as the corridors. Stainless steel tables gleamed under harsh lighting. Workers in white coats, their faces obscured by masks, moved with mechanical precision. Ingredients were measured to the gram, calories calculated to a decimal. The walls were lined with industrial ovens, each humming like a trapped beast. Here, the human element was almost erased. The process was sterile, robotic, unfeeling. Every meal leaving this room carried a story of control and manipulation. Detective Louise Harper, who had spent months investigating complaints from former inmates, knew there was more to these meals than their appearance. She had obtained detailed records of caloric content, vitamin levels, and disciplinary reports. Each tray was a tool, a weapon disguised as nutrition. Harper's notes were filled with chilling observations. Some inmates had lost significant weight in weeks, not because of medical necessity, but because of the strict regimen and psychological manipulation tied to meals. That morning, the first meal delivery triggered an unusual incident. Number 413 had placed a small note inside the tray, a plea to the outside world, to anyone who could read it. The guard's hand hovered over the slot, suspicion and curiosity warring. The tray slid through, and the note went unnoticed, lost in the shuffle of thousands of identical meals. But Harper's investigation would later uncover that such notes were rare lifelines, desperate attempts at communication in a system designed to silence. By mid-morning, the corridors buzzed with tension. Inmate interactions were minimal but electric. Every eye was calculating, watching, waiting for the slightest misstep. Food had a power the outside world rarely understood. It could trigger fights, incite protests, or drive an inmate to the edge of insanity. Inmates had memorized the schedules, the contents of trays, and the subtle cues of guards. Survival was about strategy as much as endurance. Breakfast was followed by a ritualistic cleanup. The trays, scraped as clean as possible, were wheeled back into the kitchen for sterilization. Any leftover food was carefully monitored. Nothing went to waste in a system where scarcity equaled control. The aroma lingered in the halls, a reminder of the day's first psychological battle. By noon, the effects of the morning meal became evident. Some inmates had barely eaten, swallowing only enough to avoid malnutrition. Others had consumed their trays, only to experience nausea or a bitter taste that lingered. The cafeteria, or more accurately, the slot delivery system, was not about satisfaction. It was about maintaining a delicate balance of order, submission, and fear. Harper's research revealed that complaints about the taste and texture of meals were common, yet rarely addressed. Federal guidelines dictated nutritional minimums, but the reality was starkly different. Inmates described meals that were undercooked, overcooked, or stale, yet still delivered under the guise of proper nutrition. The discrepancy between guideline and execution was intentional, a reminder of who controlled every aspect of life inside the prison walls. By evening, the cycle repeated. Dinner trays, though slightly more varied, carried the same undertones of punishment and control. A thin broth, a small portion of vegetables, and the ubiquitous protein loaf. Some inmates had learned to manipulate the system, trading pieces of food for favors or protection. Others retreated, silently enduring the monotony and psychological strain. But that night, a discovery shook the administration. Harper's investigation had uncovered a hidden storage area where trays had been tampered with, ingredients replaced, portions reduced, and messages concealed. The revelation suggested a small but significant network of dissent inside the facility, challenging the assumption that the system's control was absolute. As the final tray was delivered and the steel slots locked for the night, the prisoners settled into their cells. Each tray, each bite had left its mark on the body, the mind, and the fragile sense of autonomy that survived within these walls. Harper knew that the story was far from over. The manipulation of food was not just a matter of survival, it was a reflection of power, authority, and human endurance under extreme conditions. And in the shadows of the kitchen, behind walls designed to keep the world out, someone was watching, recording, and waiting for the next act of defiance. But when they opened a forgotten, locked storage closet beneath the kitchen, what they found changed everything. Trays from the past decade, some marked with cryptic notes, some spoiled beyond recognition, told a story that no inmate or guard could have imagined. A trail of breadcrumbs, both literal and figurative, leading to secrets the prison administration never wanted revealed. The following morning at ADX Florence was colder than usual. The mountain air crept through tiny vents, chilling the skin under layers of regulation-issued uniforms. The steel doors had a hollow resonance as they clanged open for breakfast, and the faint smell of industrial cooking crept down the corridors. The inmates were restless. Rumors had spread overnight about the hidden storage closet Harper had uncovered, the one with trays marked by cryptic notes, some decades old, others suspiciously recent. Inside cell block B, whispers moved faster than guards could notice. The inmates exchanged information like smugglers passing contraband. "Did you hear about the secret stash?" one muttered behind cupped hands. Another shook his head, eyes darting. "Yeah, word is it's not just old food. Someone's been tracking changes in the meals." Detective Harper, sitting behind her laptop in a temporary office near the administrative block, cross-referenced the names on the trays with inmate files. Every note had a signature or symbol. Some were innocent messages, requests for reading materials, letters to family. Others were coded messages, plans, grievances, threats. It became clear that a clandestine network was operating inside the prison. A small, silent rebellion was using the very mechanism of control, food, to communicate. Meanwhile, the inmates were experimenting. A tray passed through a cell slot could be modified. An extra slice of bread, a few beans from the vegetable portion, even a hidden note. Guards were aware of minor discrepancies but underestimated the sophistication. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, and yet it was building a hidden web of influence. Harper discovered that these notes were more than mere communications. They were a system, tracking who was trustworthy, who was dangerous, and who could be relied on for survival. "They've turned the food system into intelligence," she muttered under her breath. "It's their world inside this fortress." The morning tray that day contained the usual pale meat loaf and rubbery eggs. But someone had hidden a tiny scrap of paper under the slice of bread. The note read, simply, Check the northwest corner of C block at lights out. That evening, as the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the Rockies, a shadow moved silently through the narrow corridor. Harper had arranged for surveillance, but the prison's tight security and the shadows of the cell blocks made monitoring nearly impossible. A young inmate, barely 19, slipped into the northwest corner. He bent low, his hand brushing against the cold floor, and retrieved a small, folded envelope taped beneath the vent cover. Inside were more coded messages, names, numbers, and strange symbols. The significance wasn't immediately clear, but Harper recognized patterns from previous investigations into illicit prison networks. The messages indicated supply caches, communication routes, and warnings about rogue inmates. Meanwhile, tensions in cell block B escalated. One prisoner, furious at a perceived slight during breakfast, grabbed another's tray and hurled it against the steel wall. The clang echoed like gunfire. Guards immediately swarmed the hall, pulling apart the shouting, shoving the combatants back into their cells. The sound of anger reverberated, leaving a psychological mark on everyone nearby. Meals were not just about nutrition, they were about power, hierarchy, and survival. Harper focused on one tray in particular, marked with a peculiar symbol she had never seen. It was delivered to a veteran inmate known only as Coyote. According to records, Coyote had spent over 20 years in isolation, yet maintained a meticulous journal of daily events and meals. The tray contained the usual fare, but Harper suspected it carried a message. Upon inspection, she found microscopic writing on the underside of the tray, too small to notice without magnification. This discovery hinted at a deeper conspiracy. Who had access to the trays before delivery? The kitchen staff? Guards? Or someone inside the inmate ranks? Harper's investigation revealed that at least one kitchen worker had been bribed or coerced over the years to manipulate portions and leave hidden messages. The lines between the oppressors and the oppressed were blurred. In some ways, both were part of a complex ecosystem of survival and control. Night fell. Inmates retreated to their cells, but sleep was uneasy. The air smelled faintly of processed bread and disinfectant. The tiny notes moved from cell to cell like whispers carried by ghosts. Harper, reviewing security footage, noticed a pattern. The same inmate appeared near the kitchen twice, once in the early morning and again at night, each time moving quickly but subtly. No one seemed to notice, yet he was delivering something. She paused the footage, zooming in. In his hand was a folded tray liner, covered in meticulous handwriting. The next day, one of the guards found a tray with a suspicious package inside, a small, sealed envelope containing more coded messages. This was no random act. Someone inside ADX Florence had created an internal network using the prison's own food distribution system. Every meal, every tray, became a message, a warning, or an opportunity to manipulate the environment. Harper's notes began to fill with names and symbols. She cross-referenced everything with disciplinary logs and past incidents. A startling pattern emerged. Violent outbursts, food thefts, and health complaints were often preceded by these hidden messages. The trays were not only a survival mechanism, they were intelligence tools, and the system had been operating undetected for years. By the third day, Harper realized the stakes were higher than she imagined. Someone had figured out how to weaponize meals, turning them into tools of both communication and control. A single misdelivered tray could spark conflict, while a carefully prepared one could build alliances. The balance of power inside ADX Florence was delicate and lethal. Later that night, Harper received a tip from a former inmate, now in witness protection. He revealed that some meals had been intentionally designed to cause illness or discomfort as a form of psychological control. The combination of flavorless food, timing, and portion manipulation was a method of breaking down the mind, keeping inmates compliant. The revelation sent chills down Harper's spine. It wasn't just nutrition, it was behavioral engineering. As Chapter 2 closed, Harper prepared to confront the inner workings of the prison's food system. She knew the secrets hidden inside the kitchen, and the tray delivery slots could expose corruption, manipulation, and perhaps even criminal activity. But she also knew that moving too quickly could put herself and her sources in danger. And in the deepest corners of the Supermax, Behind locked doors and steel bars, someone was watching, waiting for a mistake, ready to exploit every tray, every bite, every weakness. The morning fog hung low over ADX Florence, clinging to the razor wire fences like a shroud. Detective Harper entered the facility before sunrise, her boots echoing on the cold concrete. She carried a folder thick with notes, security footage snapshots, and scanned messages, all pieced together from the coded trays and hidden communications she had tracked over the past 3 days. The tension was palpable. Today would be the day she confronted the prison's hidden network. Inside the kitchen, the normal hum of ovens and stainless steel clattering seemed almost sinister. Guards moved mechanically, unaware that Harper was watching every step. One kitchen worker, a middle-aged man named Clark, who had been quietly delivering manipulated trays, fidgeted as she entered. She showed him the evidence, pictures of trays with micro-writing, photos of coded notes, and diagrams mapping routes through the cell blocks. Clark's eyes widened. "You figured it out," he muttered, a tremor in his voice. "No one's ever gotten this far. If the warden knew," he swallowed hard, "they'd have me locked up or worse." Harper leaned closer. "Tell me everything. How long has this been going on? Who's involved?" Clark explained the system, the network of inmates who had learned to manipulate meals to communicate, form alliances, and protect themselves from the more dangerous prisoners. It wasn't just survival, it was control. Some trays were used to smuggle messages, others to test loyalty. And a few, he admitted reluctantly, were designed to provoke illness or psychological stress. The complexity was staggering. Meanwhile, in cell block B, the inmates were tense. They sensed something had shifted: Harper's presence, the heightened surveillance, the whispered warnings from the kitchen worker. Coyote, the veteran inmate, paced his cell, reading through another microscopic note he had hidden beneath his tray slot. Each symbol, each abbreviation, hinted at a larger operation, a network that had been silently thriving under the prison's rigid rules. Harper observed the delivery of trays that morning. One particular tray, addressed to Coyote, seemed ordinary. But she knew better. With a magnifying lens, she detected faint markings on the tray's bottom, a pattern she recognized from previous notes. A map. Coordinates within the block. She realized these were instructions for a meeting, an unprecedented move in solitary confinement. Later that night, Harper arranged a controlled observation. Coyote emerged from his cell for the briefest of moments, retrieving a hidden note, then quickly returning. A second inmate, a younger man, followed the trail, and Harper saw them exchange items under the cloak of shadows. This was the clandestine network in action, and she had it all on camera. But Harper also uncovered something darker. Some trays had been deliberately tampered to include spoiled or poorly prepared food in order to weaken certain inmates physically. The motives were not just survival, they were punitive, manipulative, and strategic. The warden's office claimed ignorance, but Harper suspected complicity at multiple levels. Using the evidence, Harper confronted the warden. "This isn't just about bad meals," she said firmly. "There's an organized system here, a network that uses food to communicate and control. And some of these meals have been weaponized." The warden's face remained stoic, but the lines around his eyes tightened. "We follow strict protocols," he replied cautiously. "If you have proof, we'll review it. But be careful, messing with the structure here can have consequences." The investigation escalated. Harper presented her evidence to federal authorities, detailing the network, the coded trays, and the manipulations. Interviews with former inmates corroborated her findings. They described receiving special trays with secret messages, hidden notes, and sometimes intentional food tampering. Each account confirmed the systematic control embedded in the prison's daily meals. The climax came when Harper uncovered the final piece, a logbook meticulously maintained by Coyote, documenting every tray, every message, and every reaction. It revealed not only who had been targeted and how, but also the internal hierarchy among inmates. Certain individuals wielded influence over others through the subtle manipulation of meals. It was a revelation of power hidden in plain sight. As the story broke publicly, media attention surged. Former inmates gave interviews, detailing the psychological tactics behind the meals. Experts in criminal psychology explained how prolonged exposure to monotony, malnutrition, and subtle manipulation could break down even the most resilient individuals. The revelations sparked debates about prison reform, human rights, and the ethics of control. Harper reflected on the investigation. She realized that food, an ordinary element of life, had become a weapon and a tool for survival inside ADX Florence. Every bite carried a story, some of desperation, some of strategy, and some of hidden rebellion. And yet, as Harper left the Supermax for the final time, she couldn't shake the thought that the system would adapt. Inmates would continue to use trays to communicate, to manipulate, and to survive. The warden would tighten protocols, but the ingenuity of those trapped inside would find a way. The story had concluded, but the hidden battles within the prison would persist. Harper stepped into the cold mountain air, the fortress looming behind her. She looked back once, knowing that within those steel walls, the war of survival continued. Every tray, every meal, every secret message was part of an ongoing story of control, resistance, and human ingenuity. The investigation was over, but the truth about ADX Florence's prison food would haunt the system and those who dared to expose it for years to come. Hit that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment if you think you could survive a day in solitary.